Boyhood from 2014. The IMDb logline says The Life of Mason from Early Childhood to His Arrival at College. Directed by Richard Linklater, starring Ethan Hawke, Patricia Arquette, Eller Coltrane, Lorelai Linklater, and a bunch of other people. So I put this movie on the list because this was sort of my first year where I was totally invested in the Best Picture race. I watched this movie when it came out in limited release, maybe like September timeframe and such. By then, I was already a fan of this team of people, the Before movies, and so I was very invested. And then, this movie had a lot of critical praise right at the get-go. I loved the movie right off the bat. To be honest, never expected that this movie would actually go on to be such a prominent figure in the Oscar race, because this is the Birdman year. So it's sort of impressive to me that how these two were the potential winners. And because I was so invested, it's my first year, I really followed the narratives of these two movies. So the Boyhood narrative early on was made over 12 years. What a daring experiment, never been done before. A lot of admiration for the director and the whole team, commitment to the craft of movie making, a bit of a career Oscar for Linklater. He's been nominated a little bit before for like writing screenplays and such for the Before movies, great performances, and, a chance to award something that's sort of small and intimate, which doesn't often happen at the Academy Awards, right? Then comes in Birdman, maybe like sort of October, November timeframe. Its narrative is this great sort of one take milieu that it's in, great technical achievement by Chivo. Inarritu has his own narrative, an outsider who's making it big in Hollywood. A lot of great actor comeback narratives with both Michael Keaton and Edward Norton, like two people that are very admired, but for different reasons have sort of not been in the cultural consciousness at that time. And most importantly, a movie about showbiz, about the inner workings on how do you make art, really displayed and sort of shown from the back alley green rooms of that whole setup. So the other two narratives, and it's interesting how by the time the Academy Award rolls in early next year, the Boyhood narrative has lost steam, and suddenly the whole 12-year thing has sort of become a bit of a gimmick that, oh, you did this and great, too small, too soft, whereas look at Birdman, a movie about movies, this big, loud, splashy thing. So, of course, that's what gets awarded. Of course, as we look back in time, the winner is the gimmick. And I don't know if people are actually watching the Birdman versus in my personal opinion, I think the Boyhood is going to sort of hold the test of time because it has something very simple and meaningful and poignant to say about life, So, but I just find this whole race so interesting. And as we've been saying throughout the episode, to me, this year is sort of the beginning of the changing guard, if you will, of the Academy, not international, but just younger people coming in. Let me read out the nominations for this year for Best Picture, which I think is very telling. So Birdman, American Sniper, Boyhood, Grand Budapest Hotel, Imitation Game, Selma, Theory of Everything, and Whiplash. Every other movie is sort of your Apollo 13, like sort of classic Hollywood, old guard movie, except for Boyhood and Whiplash, which is very interesting to me. And as the years would go on, here we are this year where I think there are more movies in that bucket of sort of smaller critics' darlings and such, as opposed to sort of the big Hollywood drama movies, not big Hollywood, blockbuster movies. That's a whole other thing, which they've tried to make room for, but it hasn't happened really.
Right.
So it's interesting how that sort of changed. But yeah, talking about the movie though, I don't know. I watched this again in preparation for this, and though it's a long movie, but to me, it's sort of, I don't think if life has been captured in such a beautiful way, and it's not even about the 12-year thing, but I think it's something powerful about watching the same people, not just the faces, but what these people bring from their own lives and their experiences to the movie. You see that throughout the movie, and what you're left with is the milestones don't matter. It's the little moments that do. And I think this is the trick that Linklater plays, because you're seeing these people almost in like a cinema verite, a reality TV sort of setting. The things that stay with you are the small moments, which I'm sure was probably what making the movie felt like too. They got together every year and did a little bit of stuff, and a memory sort of sort of stood out. And if you interview these people, that's what they would probably say. They'll point to random moments from those last 10, 12 years of making the movie. And that's how life is too. So I think I love sort of that meta quality of making the movie and how the movie feels like, how seamless it is. It doesn't, there's not much exposition. You're never told what year you're in. There's no sort of, oh, now he's going to school, or now she's with husband number 5 or whatever. Stuff just happens, and that's just how life is. You love some, you hate some. I also love all the performances, especially this is sort of my year where Ethan Hawke attained sort of my guy status, if you will.
Okay.
If there's a person that I would want to go on a walk with and hang out with for like a whole day, of course he will do all the talking. I wouldn't get a chance. I would love that. He just seems so very showy and pretentious in many ways, but also just so deep and interesting. And I think this movie could easily be dadhood as well, if that were a word. I love that performance. So yeah, this is my number 2 for the race, but also that sometimes sort of odd small things that are not showy in the ways that we normally think Oscar movies can be, rise to the top. And even if they don't win, I think to me the win is that this movie was in that conversation, which I think is pretty amazing.
Yeah, so I had not seen this movie. I as I mentioned before, not a fan of Richard Linklater, other than his very mainstream Dazed and Confused and School of Rock. At the time, I was, every year I do try to see all the Best Picture winners for the award. I was kind of putting this off because it was long, and I'm like, Richard Linklater, I'm like, this is such a gimmick movie. And I just didn't get to it before the award show. And then because it didn't win, I'm like, well, okay, I don't really have to go out of my way to try to see this. So this is the first time me seeing this film. I have to say, I still think it's a gimmick. And that the gimmick doesn't work.
Yeah.
And overall, I thought, nah, it was like a shrug movie for me. I was like, didn't dislike it, but so few elements of the film worked for me. I think it almost seemed like a movie concept that you would come up with, like if you were like super high. It's like, oh, what if we shot a movie over 12 years, man? Like that'd be kind of cool. And then you kind of do it, and then it doesn't end up, the product isn't as interesting as when you came up with that idea when you were super high. That's not to be said, there aren't some good things in it. I mean, it was interesting in the beginning. I was really taken with like the first 20, 30 minutes when it does capture a lot of what you're saying of like these little moments. You're seeing this child actor who I don't think the kid actors were really any good. It was actually kind of distracting in the first 20 minutes of the movie, but where you see like all the different things that he remembers, there aren't the big things. Sometimes, yeah, it's like going to Harry Potter and getting the midnight book, but it's these little moments of like, oh, and my dad does this, or these little things that as a child actually are very impactful to you, that you don't think about. And parents sometimes too. I mean, I'm not a parent, but I think as a parent, you have to think about little things that maybe aren't important to you, really leave lasting impressions on your child. And I think the movie did a very good job in the first 20 or 30 minutes, kind of capturing that of how this child is being impacted by these small moments. I don't think though that later on in the film, you ever saw those moments actually changing this person's life at all. And I felt that the gimmick of using the same actors actually to me was sort of distracting from the message, in the sense of I don't really care that the guys were getting older. I mean, you can do that with makeup. What I care is the narrative of this person's life kind of evolving. And I felt like that piece was being left to the wayside. Like, I think you could have cut the movie in half and say, here's the teenage, I forget the character's name, the teenage boy, and then the young boy. And it's almost like I don't really draw things back to, what impacted him as a child and then led to have decisions that he had in his teenage years. that piece was a bit missing for me. It actually reminded me of two different I guess films. The first one is the Up series. It's like a documentary series out of England. And what they did was it started in the 60s, and every 7 years they filmed the same group of people.
Hmm.
And it's their real lives evolving over. I mean, they've tracked these people now from kids all the way up until, old age. And it's just seeing how their lives have changed between each of those series, because it's their real lives and not a scripted thing. I thought was much more effective than trying to do something like that in a narrative form. And then another movie that it reminded me of that I thought just did a much better job in trying to capture like the small moments, how it impacts you, was Terrence Malick's Tree of Life, which is, yes, it's not the same actor who plays Sean Penn as a child, but I really felt the impact that his father, Brad Pitt, in that film had over his life. And you can see the impacts because there's a lot of juxtaposition between those two stories, instead of it being told kind of narratively and sort of I don't want to say haphazard, but in a very cinema verite way. I will say, though, that Ethan Hawke was the best part of the movie. Like, I thought he was the most interesting character. I could sort of track his progression as a human a lot more than I could the son, and then was very shocked that Patricia Arquette, honestly, that first of all got any accolades for this movie, and she actually ended up winning the Oscar. I thought her performance was such a nothing burger, for lack of a better word, in this entire film. And the big breakdown at the end, like, you're leaving home, this is so sad. I'm like, that just is like acting of a high school level performance. And it didn't land with me at all, because I didn't really feel like her character was kind of changing and evolving over time, nor did I feel that she had a real relationship with her son. And like, none of her performance worked for me. But Ethan Hawke, I thought, actually was the most interesting part of the film. So yeah, overall, I did not dislike the movie. I'm definitely glad I finally saw it, though it was very long. I mean, it felt like once he becomes a teenager, I'm just like not just as interested. He's just like this mopey kid. But I do feel like over time, this movie will be more like remembered for the production gimmick. And it also felt like that's why they were trying to like give it accolades, because like, oh, cool, you did this over 12 years. It's a great gimmick. We have to reward you for this, for like just a you did it kind of thing, as opposed to the art itself. And it was funny too, like looking back over the awards that year. I just think a very weak year across the board. I agree with you. Like Birdman, I liked the movie. It was good at the time. I don't really feel like I need to go back and watch it again. But just looking across the board, I feel like even now, most of these films are, I don't want to say like forgotten, but really haven't been held up over the test of time. If only for Boyhood, because of that gimmick. It'll be like, oh yeah, that was that movie that they filmed over 12 years. The rest of the films, I think, are already forgotten, like less than 10 years later. It's
pretty
just
much, except
big
for
shift
Budapest
from
Hotel,
75.
which I love, but most of the other movies are, and Whiplash too. I think there's love for that movie, but the rest of them have faded.
I'm not saying these films are bad necessarily, though. I think there's some. Well, even American Sniper is problematic as that film in a lot of different ways, and how bad that little baby actor was. It's not like these are poor films, but I think these are just not films that, last the test of time. And if someone was going back and watching like Best Picture winners and they wanted to do all of them, and they got to this year, they'd be like, yeah, Birdman, like, okay, like not bad, but not, something that I feel is deserving of an Oscar necessarily. So yeah, definitely glad I saw this movie finally, because it had been something that I'd been curious about because of that production history, but just did not really take to kind of a meh for me on this one.
Well, we always disagree on this movie. And
definitely. Yeah.
To me, I think all of that works, and I think Patricia Arquette actually is amazing in the movie. But
you do, okay? Because that was surprising, like how anyone could like that. Very surprising this is the performance they decided to award instead of Ethan Hawke, who I do felt did a very good job in this film.
Every race is also different, right? So there's usually sort of one person that ends up being the representative, is sort of how it works in the award race. So, but I think I'll make one sort of note, and then we should move on.
Yeah,
is that I think, to me, with Patricia Arquette, like that is the point of the movie, is that this is a person who's actually just trying to hold on to life and trying to just make things work. And she's sort of chaotic, doesn't make the best choices, doesn't really have that kind of loving bond and relationship. She's basically a caretaker. Doesn't mean she doesn't love her kids. She's just a
Right.
caretaker.
Mm-hmm.
And that last moment, which you talked about, I think it's meant to feel kind of childish because she's found a way to make this about herself. She's
Mm-hmm.
not sort of saying, "Oh, I'm going to miss you." She's like, "This was it. It's just going to be my funeral from now." It is actually a very childlike high schooler outburst.
Well, for sure. That's
Because
true.
she's finally realizing that, oh, I've just been this caretaker person and just made horrible choices for what was afforded to me. And this is sort of this, him leaving becomes a trigger point for her to kind of express her, or maybe in a weird way even acknowledge her kind of childishness, if you will. So I think to me that is the point, if you will. And another actor in a different movie would make that scene, gut wrenching and what have you, in like a different kind of a way.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think this is supposed to be that. That's how I take it. And that's sort of, I think, the genius of the movie, if you will. And I think to your point of like, the narrative actually does work for me. It does feel like we're checking in with these people. And I love kind of that meta quality of like, yeah, it's scripted, but it also feels real because these people are the same people. So I think it has this interesting juxtaposition. But yeah, we obviously disagree on this.
Yeah. Again, glad I saw it, but I feel it should have either been a documentary or a movie shot all at the same time. I think the gimmick kind of distracts in a negative way from the film. But
I would urge you to maybe watch this movie in like, I don't know, 5-6 years or what have you. And I'll be very curious how you think about it.
I sit through it. It's long, but I can sit through it again.
Hey there, it's Alex. If you like the review and discussion Karan and I just had, make sure you subscribe to our channel, Movies That Shaped Us, to get full episodes. Every other Wednesday, Karan and I cover a topic around important people, places, events, and moments in our lives, and then explore it through 3 of our favorite movies. Subscribe right now or follow our podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts via the link in the description below. Hope you join us for the journey.